Hello, good afternoon, good evening for some of you. Welcome to today's presentation where we are going to talk all about burnout. And we're going to start by discussing 5 major ways that burnout affects your workplace. So my name is Thais Gibson. I am the founder of the Personal Development School, and I run a course hosting platform where we have over 50 different courses that discuss everything from mental health to burnout to career growth to breaking through glass ceilings by addressing limiting beliefs, limiting programs in our lives. And we currently have over 10,000 students and a YouTube channel with close to 150,000 subscribers. So I am going to be sharing with you a whole bunch of really powerful tips and tools today that cover burnout and how burnout is really affecting us, whether we are an employee, an employer, or mid-level management, and how that sort of has a trickle-down effect from both sides. So we're going to talk about what burnout is. We're also going to discuss the 5 stages of burnout and the cost of burnout today. And something that I really think is important for us to take a look at is looking at the root causes of burnout. I think sometimes we treat a lot of things in our lives at the symptom level. We try to address behaviors. And what's really important to recognize is that behavior is always an effect of some sort of belief that's taking place first, some sort of unmet need that's living at a subconscious level within our mind. And when we address root causes of things, the effects get to transform as a byproduct without the struggle, without the difficulty, without all the challenges. And so we're going to discuss a lot of the root causes from the external factor point of view and internal factor. And then we're going to talk about how to really create transformation when it comes to burnout in and of itself. So my favorite definition of burnout that I found is by the Mayo Clinic. And the definition of burnout is a state of physical or emotional exhaustion that also involves a sense of reduced accomplishment and loss of personal identity. Now, burnout is not a medical diagnosis. Some experts think that other conditions such as depression may be behind burnout. But I really want to highlight this key phrase in here, which is that burnout is a state of physical or emotional exhaustion. And we are going to dig into what that means, and it's going to come up a lot throughout the presentation today. So 5 major ways that burnout affects the workplace as a whole. Number 1, employee turnover. When employees are burned out, and we're going to talk specifically today about the types of employees that are more likely to do this, but when individuals are burnt out, they're obviously more likely to walk away. And this can be very costly to anybody who's running a business, because then there's the rehiring process, there's time and energy put in to interviewing and finding the right candidates. There is also a massive impact on mental health in the workplace as a whole. Key features obviously being anxiety and depression. There's the rehiring process that goes hand in hand with turnover. And then we have things like disengagement and absenteeism, which have a massive statistical impact on the workplace as well, from a cost perspective. So it's important to note that burnout affects not just employees, but also managers and employers. And there's sort of a trickle down and trickle up effect going both ways. And individuals experiencing burnout obviously struggle the most with things like depression, exhaustion, fatigue, gastrointestinal issues, rumination, helplessness, and oftentimes complete lack of motivation. So obviously for the person experiencing burnout, this is the most impactful. This is where it hits home the most. But then there's this chain reaction of events that takes place. Now, the Harvard Business Review reports that burnout actually adds between 125 billion and 190 billion every year in healthcare costs, and stress alone accounts for 8% of the national healthcare spend. And then a Gallup poll calculated that burnt out employees cost $3,400 out of every $10,000 in salary as a rough estimate, purely because of disengagement. So it's really important to recognize this is huge. I mean, that's a massive impact. And this then has that trickle up effect where, it has this stress put on the company's overhead and productivity. And then extra workload happens on management if they're not the ones getting burnt out, but perhaps the individuals they're supervising or employing. because they then have to work beyond their capacity. So this really can have this ripple out effect in many different forms. Now, if you're not sure whether you are experiencing burnout or on the way to being burnt out, or you're noticing shifts and changes in productivity, and you're wondering what's going on for you, or perhaps if you have an employee and you're wondering if they are experiencing changes and perhaps on a trajectory towards becoming burnt out, there are 5 stages of burnout that tend to exist in a chronological order that you can tune into and sort of be aware of and gauge where you're at along the way. So the first stage is the honeymoon stage of burnout. And in the honeymoon stage, it actually starts off with a lot of job satisfaction, a lot of accepting responsibility, even things like feeling extra creative, productive, and unbridled optimism tends to take place. And then we have stage 2, which is this onset of stress. And this is correlated with things like reduced sleep quality, irritability, anxiety, feeling the need to withdraw ever so slightly, so contributing to a lack of social interaction, and neglect of personal needs. Now, this is where we can start really seeing some of burnout taking hold. And what you're seeing is because that emotional bandwidth that you normally have going throughout your day starts shrinking, this causes things like frustration, minor subtle negative emotions like irritability, low level anxiety, and then this withdrawing, this need to sort of go back into your shell a little bit, neglect your own needs, and sort of get into a bit of a survival mode. And you'll see that through that lack of social interaction that begins to take place. Then we have chronic stress stage. And this is where these factors are persistent. And it's really important to recognize that if we don't catch burnout early enough, if we catch it later on, then there's a whole impact on our nervous system and on our body as a whole, meaning that it will then take a certain amount of time to actually recover. So obviously, if you're catching burnout in stage 2 versus in stage 4, there's going to be an easier recovery time the earlier that you actually catch burnout taking place. So in our chronic stress stage, we have more persistent tiredness. It seems to be like your set point all of a sudden. We experience a lot more procrastination, feelings of pressure, coping mechanisms like numbing and avoidance. And then we start seeing a lot more apathy and withdrawing take place. Then we have stage 4, and this is we have actually reached burnout. And this is associated with an obsession or rumination with problems, a hyper focusing on them. This is actually a feature of the subconscious mind we're going to talk about later, where your subconscious mind will ruminate about something when you have an unmet need, and it's basically trying to call attention to your conscious mind's function. Then we have things like gastrointestinal issues, a more pessimistic outlook, a lot of self-doubt, more isolation, more extreme neglect of your own self and needs, and then behavioral changes and things like escapism. And finally, we get literally into habitual burnout, which is characterized by chronic sadness, mental fatigue, physical fatigue, and even things like depression. And so we want to be able to recognize burnout as it's happening early on, find out what stage we're in, and then use the tools and steps from today that we're going to do a deep dive into for how to actually address these root causes of burnout and see transformation so that we can get back into our lives and feel like we are re-energized, like we're thriving, that we're focused, that we are getting our needs met in many areas of life so that we can feel like the best version of ourselves. And remember, this is a massive thing that's taking place worldwide right now. Burnout has sort of been wreaking havoc on workplaces all over the place. We've seen things like the Great Resignation. We know, as mentioned earlier, the cost of burnout healthcare per year in all workplaces is over 125 billion in the United States alone. So we also know if people are more burnt out, it can be easier to cut and run, to feel like, okay, I'm going to get out of here. My needs are not met. I'm unhappy. And so what we want to look at is how can we stop ourselves if we are the employee from having to get to that space where we feel like we have to leave a job because we're so unhappy and unfulfilled? What can we do first so that we can still thrive, have healthy boundaries, get our needs met from work? And what can we do at the employer level to prevent burnout from taking place so profoundly in so many workplaces worldwide right now? So the first thing you really want to realize here when we really talk about how we can transform some of these pain points is that burnout is not always caused by overworking. The number of hours working does not necessarily correlate with how burnt out a person becomes. So we may see, for example, somebody who works 50 hours per week, who is really challenged by that 50-hour work week. Even 40-hour work weeks, we can see employees get really burnt out. Or we can see 50 hours a week for somebody else who absolutely loves what they're doing. Their needs are really met. They have healthy boundaries. They've got good recharging activities. 50 hours a week for somebody else can be a cakewalk. And so what we're going to talk about is not just looking at burnout from the perspective of, oh, you're overworked and so you just need more time off. Time off doesn't really do a whole lot if we are not properly and effectively knowing what our needs are from our time off and actually taking action steps to recharge. And this is a silly analogy, but it really illustrates the point well. I always say to people, sometimes I see people who are burnt out and they'll say things to me like, oh, I just need one extra day a week off. If I just had one extra day a week, I think everything would be okay and I could get back into balance. And I'll say to people, okay, so you think it's a time issue, but if for one extra day per week, you had to sit alone in a dark room and not speak to anybody, and you were just, in complete silence, couldn't do anything in the dark one extra day per week. If that's what your time was spent doing, would you want that one extra day every single week? Or would you be like, no, I'd rather not have the one extra day per week and be able to have my freedom to do what I need to do? And people will always answer, no, I don't want to be trapped in a room one extra day a week. I want to use that time for something. And what we're actually looking for when we're looking for more time to recharge or to re-energize or to replenish ourselves is specific needs that we want to get met within that period of time. And so what we have to start recognizing today is that burnout has some important external factors that we have to address that are workplace specific, that if you're an employer are important to take a look at. But if you are an employer or employee and you are struggling with burnout, there are major internal factors that are most important to address. And these are our root causes. And again, by transforming root cause, we can change our behavior and our emotional state that follow. So the internal factors that we really want to take a look at are our unmet needs. If we have our needs fully met in the workplace or met as much as is humanly possible, we are extremely unlikely to get burned out. If we have poor boundaries in the workplace, if we're always taking on everybody else's work and we don't feel like we can say no, or if we're constantly putting pressure on ourselves to people please, to overperform and overachieve, we're almost always in a state of sympathetic nervous system mode at work. This is fight or flight mode. And we can't actually be in that state without getting more easily burnt out, because the state our body's supposed to be in through the vast majority of the day is parasympathetic nervous system mode. This is rest and digest mode. So if we have poor boundaries, it can lead to disruptions in the way that we regulate our nervous system, which of course is just a pathway leading to burnout long term. So we have to assess and evaluate our boundaries, and we also have to look at our limiting beliefs. And if we're carrying a tremendous amount of limiting beliefs, so let's pretend I have a belief that I will fail. Well, what happens is if I'm constantly believing that when I go to take on new projects in the workplace, I'm constantly causing myself to feel fear at a subconscious level. I've got this belief. It comes up when I take on something new, and then I feel the emotion of fear. And then over time, I'm going to start doing things like avoiding, sabotaging, procrastinating, withdrawing, hiding, feeling anxious, feeling insecure, and having these beliefs running the way I feel about myself in the workplace on a regular basis will also cause me to be in a disrupted nervous system state, will also cause me to be in sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight mode, have too much extra added stress that doesn't necessarily have to be there. And so we're going to really do a deep dive today into these internal factors, how you can change these things, how you can come to know your needs, establish your boundaries, and what type of boundary setter you are, and what the healthy version is that you want to get to. And then we're going to talk about how to identify the most common limiting beliefs in the workplace and help you pluck out what these beliefs are and actually take action to break through these limiting, again, at the root cause. So from a more surface perspective, we obviously have our external factors first. And you can check in, and you're welcome to share as well in the chat, or just take some notes and write them down. But external factors in the workplace will play a role because they will attribute to poor boundaries, more limiting beliefs, more unmet needs. So our external environment can impact our internal environment, thus leading to burnout long term. So these will be important things to address if you're an employer, but of course, important to speak up on behalf of if you feel like these things are out of proportion or unhealthy for you in the workplace. And these are things like too high of demands. Confusing interactions can really weigh people down, believe it or not, because oftentimes if there's not a lot of clarity in terms of what's needed from you, what the deadline is, it can cause people to sort of get into a bit of a freeze mode or disrupted nervous system regulation mode again. So high demands, confusing interactions, poor leadership and collaboration obviously really affects morale in the workplace. Unmet needs as a whole, so that your needs are not met because you're not aware of what they are, but often too, we can have an environment that's just not conducive to meeting people's needs in general. And then there can be things like too much pressure in the workplace, lack of freedom in the workplace, poor communication, lack of resources, lack of teamwork, and negative feedback. And all of these things are important to pay attention to. I see John. Hi, John. How are you? You said, I definitely have a fear of failure, and I'm happy you're addressing this topic. This is like literally the end of our presentation. We have all these examples about fear of failure and how to actually reprogram this and remove this fear from our mind at a subconscious level and also identify where it comes from. So I'm glad you're resonating with this. So all of these different external factors are important to take into consideration. And you can keep in mind, like, what are the big things that show up for you in this area? Like, what are the things that you would want to facilitate change around, or even perhaps speak up about if you see these things are not working in a healthy, systematic way for you at work. But then we have our internal factors. And these are the most important components, because when we have these internal factors, and we don't take action on behalf of creating change, it doesn't matter what our external environment is, we will constantly find ourselves likely to be burnt out over and over and over again, despite where we're working, despite where our external environment is or what it's like. I also see Alfiem. Hi, Alfiem. How are you? Overachieving is a sympathetic nervous system response. Absolutely. Great, Sharon. Thank you. And it is, and it comes from a limiting belief a lot of the time of fear of failure, similar to John, or of feeling not good enough. And so if we feel that way, then we feel like we have to compensate for it. And to some small degree, sometimes it's good to stretch ourselves or go outside of our comfort zone, of course, but it becomes unsustainable if that belief is really strong and really intense, because then it produces these constant anxious feelings that then create that behavioral response of needing to overcompensate and do more and be more. And if that's not within a healthy balance or a healthy framework for ourselves, then of course it dysregulates our nervous system. We get into sympathetic nervous system mode all the time, and it exhausts us over a period of time. It's not sustainable long term. Anyways, we'll talk about the limiting beliefs in a little bit. But our internal factor number one is unmet needs. And the most important thing when we talk about unmet needs, or one of the most important things, is that we have to recognize we have a conscious mind and we have a subconscious mind. And our subconscious mind and unconscious mind collectively, but we'll call this all the totality of the subconscious mind, are responsible for 95 to 97% of our beliefs, our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors or actions. So our conscious mind, this part of ourself that we're really aware of, and these intentional habits or behaviors we have, literally take up roughly 3 to 5% of all of the way we feel, think, what we believe, and how we act. And our conscious mind, if you imagine like an iceberg diagram, our conscious mind is that little tip of the iceberg. And then we've got the totality of this huge beneath the surface subconscious mind. And our conscious mind cannot outwill or overpower our subconscious mind. And so when we have these unmet needs, what actually is taking place is our subconscious mind is a needs meeting machine. So our subconscious mind throughout the course of the day is trying to pull us in the direction of our unmet needs. So if I have a lot of unmet needs at work and I try to go and sit down and write an assignment or do a project for work, but if I have unmet needs for things like, variety or learning or growth or connection, and my report that I'm supposed to be doing at work doesn't meet any of those needs, this is actually what self-sabotage and procrastination are. There's no such thing as self-sabotage. All self-sabotage is just simply a war between your conscious and subconscious mind. Your conscious mind says, I'm going to write the report. Your subconscious mind says, no, we're going to talk to everybody at work. we're going to look on social media because we'd rather be, spending time with friends. We don't have these connection needs met in our lives. So I'm going to try to get it through the computer screen, through connecting to what people are doing outside of work, right? Experience as forms of procrastination or self-sabotage. My conscious mind intending one thing and my subconscious mind, this much greater, more powerful force beneath the surface, pulling me in a different direction. And our conscious mind can, make some headway, but our subconscious mind is going to constantly pull us back. So if you've ever had the experience of feeling like in your life, you've got the gas pedal and the brakes on sort of at the same time, and you're in this strong, like push-pull feeling where you're like, I have to do this, I have to get this done. And yet you can't seem to really make headway. Almost certainly there is a component being reflected to you of your conscious mind trying to do something, but your subconscious mind prioritizing other needs it has that your task that you're trying to complete is not giving to you. Your report is not giving you your needs for connection. And so your subconscious mind is sabotaging it, quote unquote. But really what this is simply your conscious mind and subconscious mind being pulled in opposing directions, these two opposing forces. And so what happens is we go through trying to work at things and complete and achieve things that are so much more difficult than they actually need to be, rather than if we can just hack the system. Okay. And what that means is we can just find out what our own subconscious needs are in the workplace and then just learn to align ourselves with these needs. So an example of this would be, these are some major examples of needs, and take some time here. These are the most common needs of employees in the workplace. There are other ones, but these are the most common ones, our top 10. Take some time and note here what drives you. And if you're an employer or a manager, or even if you just have other people you work with who are your colleagues, try to look at what drives them and try to think of different examples of like how when we try to do something that's outside of our needs, it can be so difficult. So we have the needs of certainty, variety, acknowledgement or appreciation, to feel like seen and noticed at work or validated, right? They all go in alignment with acknowledgement. Learning, self-expression, growth and empowerment, connection, stability and comfort, independence or autonomy, and trust. And like, let's look at some examples of this. If you're somebody who works in like a fast-paced environment with a ton of variety, so let's use the example of a startup. If you are somebody who works for a startup and you have really strong needs for certainty and stability and comfort, you're going to be really challenged, and you're going to find a lot more self-sabotage and procrastination because your conscious mind is saying, I have to show up to work every day and take action and, have this startup. And then your subconscious mind is going to go, no, we need certainty. We need stability. We need comfort. We don't want this right now. And so you're going to feel a lot of push-pull. You're going to feel more challenged unnecessarily by your workplace, all sorts of things. If you look at another example of somebody who works alone and, doesn't have needs for independence or autonomy, but instead has really strong needs for connection, they're going to feel more burnt out at work. Why? Because your conscious mind is going to go, I need to show up for work for 40 hours a week. And your subconscious mind is going to go, no, we need connection. We're starving for connection. And so work is going to feel unnecessarily heavy, challenging, difficult, frustrating. And then going to work takes so much extra force to show up when it's actively going against what your subconscious mind is trying to pull you towards instead. So one of the first things that you can really notice here is, what are your needs, right? And let's say, I'll give one last example and then I'll actually tell you how to solve for this. Because I see Karen saying, is there a quick fix? Great question. We'll definitely talk about the exact fixes to address root cause. And there's a quick fix as it relates to our needs. That's very easy to implement. So when we look at this, like burnout being a state of physical and emotional exhaustion, it's emotionally exhausting to try to do something that's actively taking you away from what your subconscious mind is constantly prioritizing, whether you're aware of it or not. And so one last example is, let's say you're in a workplace where you're somebody who maybe needs to be acknowledged, needs validation, needs to feel like you have trust around your coworkers and supervisors, and can go and speak to these individuals and connect with them and share with them and be acknowledged. And then you work so hard, but you don't get any acknowledgments. You're just not in a workplace that really pays attention to that, and don't get much validation, and don't feel like you can really talk to the people around you about things that your needs that you have at work, then you're going to feel like you're wilting a lot more easily, right? You're going to feel like, oh, I'm not getting my needs met. I feel disempowered. So there are some very simple steps to Karen's question. Hi, Karen. And some very simple steps here, if you pay close attention, for how to actually change this, because we know this is one of the top 3 major root causes for burnout. And it's to identify what are my needs and how can I initiate. And I want to be really clear, there's a massive difference between passively reacting to things in life, like my workplace is the way it is, so I just have to leave it at that, versus actively initiating. And when we have this information, we can actually actively initiate what we want to see and how we want to facilitate change. So let's say you're somebody who has a need for certainty, and let's say you're not getting a lot of certainty. This is an important conversation to have. You can make a list. What are some creative ways to get my needs met for certainty at work? I can create my own schedule. I can ask for more order and structure from my boss or coworkers. I can ask for clearer deadlines. I can set some more boundaries at work so I'm clear on what I'm doing and don't have to be doing. I can create more order and structure in terms of how I align myself throughout the course of the day and my meeting times. Like, we can initiate our needs. And of course, you may have a workplace that isn't conducive to that. And of course, if you're just seeing that your needs are so unmet and your workplace, when you express needs or try to get them met in different forms, just doesn't show up for that, then that's a different conversation. But the vast majority of the time, burnout can be resolved by just knowing our needs and creating intentional strategies for how we can initiate getting our needs met from work. If you're somebody who needs more connection, right, then maybe you ask for more connection. Hey, I'm somebody who really needs more teamwork. I want to work on more team projects. Perhaps you just take some time out to really connect with people more so on your lunch break and initiate creating more connections in your life. Perhaps you're somebody who needs more learning. And so you want to look at these different needs and you want to think of intentional strategies to get these needs met. And a lot of them happen just through communication with team members, supervisors, other individuals in the workplace. And a great way of positioning this is to go to other people that you work with and to tell them, look, let's say it's your manager, to go to them and say, hey, I want to share something with you about myself. I notice that I thrive and I'm the best, most productive version of myself when I'm working more on a team and when I have other teammates that I'm working with and I have connection. And I want to share this with you because I think it will increase my productivity and benefit you and the workplace accordingly. And so you can share these things, right? But the idea here is to get the information, which is what are my needs, what needs are unmet, and then how can I initiate these needs being met at work? One other version of this is if you find yourself struggling a little bit and your workplace isn't conducive to getting these needs met, you can double down on these needs outside of work, right? So if you're somebody who, when you come home, don't just go on autopilot, don't just watch TV on autopilot and let the evening pass you by. Be intentional. If I know that I need a lot of connection, I'm going to make sure that I get that connection outside of work if I'm somebody who currently works alone, right? So just be as intentional as possible about your time, your energy, your effort, and what you can do to move the needle. So this is root cause number 1. Let me know my needs from work. Let me get these needs met. This is part of what replenishes me, re-energizes me as a whole. And if you're an employer, by the way, you'll see this in your employees. Like, you'll see who responds better to more certainty, who needs more clarity with deadlines, with how structure should go. You'll see other employees who really detest being micromanaged and really thrive when you give them the independence and autonomy and you leave things open-ended and you say to them, look, I want to see this project move in this direction. I trust you to take the lead. You know what? Here's your deadline and go for it. And they thrive when they have that independence and autonomy. And if you take that away from them and you start micromanaging them, they start getting frustrated. They procrastinate. They self-sabotage. So it's really powerful to look at, what are my needs as an individual, or also what are the needs of the employees around me, the people I am employing, if I'm somebody who runs a company. And when we pay attention to these things, we can see transformation. So that's root cause number 1. Gayatri, hello, how are you? You said, how can we effectively showcase our work to our manager working from a different location? Amazing question. Like, I hear that probably one of your needs, since you're asking that, if we go back to the needs slide, is maybe for acknowledgement or to be seen or heard, right? So that you can actually showcase, look, I'm working really hard. And when I'm working really hard, I still need this acknowledgement. And sometimes when we're working on our own because we're in a different location or we're more location independent, sometimes we don't get that acknowledgement. So what I would actually say, Gayatri, is for you to try to identify when I want to showcase my work, what need am I trying to get met? And then I can actually express that need to my employer or to your manager, as you said, would be strategy number one. Strategy number two, to book a meeting and say, hey, I noticed that I thrive when I get feedback, and ask for a 15-minute meeting once a week or something that's very low hanging fruit, and ask, can you meet with me? And I want to take you through what I'm working on. And I would like to receive feedback. This is how I feel like I'm clear and I can keep moving and growing. And this is when I'm the most productive. So don't be afraid to like recognize what you need from this and ask for it. So fantastic question. And Daniela, hi Daniela, how are you? To your question as well, how our business is functioning in a hybrid workplace. There's so many different strategies that are important. For myself, we have about 25 or so employees, and we're sort of in like a hybrid workspace. And there's a whole bunch of different things, but I find that like the agile method and having like employees with deliverables planned into sprints and having a lot of communication and connection, having people clock in at certain work hours, a lot of these things can be very, very beneficial. So it's really like doubling down on like what the components are of your workplace, and then being intentional again about how we can actually make sure that if we need efficiency, we need communication, how can we intentionally create healthy ways of healthy strategies to support what we're needing here. So great question. Okay, so internal factor number 2 when it comes to burnout is boundaries. Now, there's a lot of research that goes into our attachment styles in the workplace. And this is sort of a whole separate topic, but from a lot of research into attachment theory, which has been around for over 100 years, has been studied. A lot of research into attachment theory discusses how we have different types of styles of connection and ways that we communicate with others. Now, this impacts our romantic relationships, our friendships, our family relationships, but it also affects our co-working relationships. And different attachment styles have a different relationship to boundaries. And so when we're talking about burnout, something that's really interesting is based on these different styles of ways we connect, there tend to be different relationships we have to boundaries. And our relationship to our boundaries basically comes from what we learn about boundaries in our childhood, how our subconscious mind adopts programming, right? We go through conditioning when we're growing up. And so through conditioning, we learn what boundaries are based on largely the types of boundaries we had with our family members growing up. So there are different types of boundary setters based on attachment theory. And we can break these into 4 major categories. And you can check in and ask yourself, who am I when it comes to boundaries? Because boundaries have a massive impact on burnout. If we don't have good boundaries, we're going to struggle when it comes to being burnt out. And we'll find ourselves, no matter what workplace we're in, over and over again, we're usually on a path towards becoming burnt out quite quickly. So this is a huge component of internal root cause leading to burnout that we can correct, that we have control over. And so this is our 4 major types. Our number 1, our people pleaser. This is like our chronic non-boundary setter. This is somebody who all the time tends to be so preoccupied with what people think about them at work, with the acknowledgement or feedback they're getting at work, that wants to be approved of at work, that is so concerned with like being liked, included, validated, that they forget about what they need as a person. And again, this usually comes from, this is what they learned in childhood, actually helps them interact in their childhood relationships. But remember, now we're in our adult lives. And so we want to look at these things and say, hey, I might, there's benefits to this. Maybe I'm really likable. I get along with people. I'm very aware of my social relationships. That may help in many forms at work. But there are also big drawbacks to this, which the number 1 drawback to being the chronic people pleaser at work is that you forget about you. And you're often taking, a lot of versions of this that I would see with clients in the past, or even students in our school. I would see what happens is they don't say no, right? They just say yes. And then suddenly they have all these people around them at work who are like, oh, can you help me with this? Oh, can you finish this project for me? Oh, I need some support on this deadline. Can you take on this portion of the project? And suddenly the people pleaser says yes, yes, yes. And then they fall behind on their work because they're so busy doing for everybody else. And so they may be well liked, they might get a lot of validation, but a lot of times what I would see over time is either this person just gets really burnt out eventually because they're working all these extra long hours to accommodate for all these extra tasks they're not saying no to, or this person feels frustrated over time because they're going, hey, like, what about me? I feel like I'm giving all this support, but not receiving. And you may see, if you're this individual, if you're this type, you may see that this impacts your friendships, your romantic relationships, your family relationships as well. So it's important to be aware of. And again, we'll talk about how to correct this. Number 2 is our extreme boundary setter. This is the person on the opposite end of the continuum from the people pleaser. And they are often cold and blunt and will be really straight to the point, and they'll just say no to a ton of different things. And they won't often really show up and say, hey, I don't have a lot of time, but I can give you 5 minutes. Like they seem to be unforgiving or unwilling to compromise. And again, this can benefit them because they can stay really focused on their own work. But sometimes we need to make compromises in the workplace as well. It's not just having the strongest boundaries ever that gets you ahead. Sometimes extending yourself a little bit can be beneficial as well, and reaching out and giving support at times. So what we have to learn to do is find that balance and harmony. And then we have our third major style here of boundary setter, which I like to call the swinging pendulum. And this is the individual who often will get into a position where they are people pleasing. Then they hit a tipping point where they kind of get their fill. And then they often feel resentful or frustrated, and they swing their pendulum way to the opposite side and become blunt and harsh and say no to everything, or sometimes even express anger or frustration at other people after not setting their own boundaries, which ultimately we are accountable for our own boundaries. So it's important to pay attention to this. And then last but not least, we have our stable setter. And this is the person with balance and harmony in the way that they set boundaries. This is the person that learns to take themselves into consideration when people ask for requests, but also individuals who are willing to compromise once they've considered themselves. So what this looks like, for example, would be if Bob, my coworker, let's pretend, comes in and says, hey, I have this deadline and I really need your help. Can you take on this last portion of this project? It'll take about 45 minutes. I really need your support. I would, rather than just saying yes and being the people pleaser, or rather than just automatically saying, no, I don't do that, and being the extreme boundary setter, I would look at what my workload is like. And I would go, if I'm ahead on things, then I have some room. If I'm really not ahead on things, then I would ask myself, like, how much time am I willing to give and to share with Bob? And how much am I willing to stay late? But I'm consciously thinking about it. And I'm taking into consideration the other things I have going on in my life. If I have young children that need me, if I, have other things that I'm trying to get ahead on outside of work that are important to me, maybe I'm moving or doing renovations. So I actually think about myself. I assess what I'm willing to give in a way that allows me to extend myself, but not that sacrifices me, not where then I'm later frustrated, resentful, stressed, overwhelmed. So let's say I'm ahead on things. I might say, yeah, no problem, Bob. I'd love to support you and help you out. And this is great in the workplace to do. Maybe I'm just even keel. Maybe I'm just up to par and I'm not ahead on things. But maybe I've got some stuff that's important to do outside of work. Maybe I say, you know what, Bob, I wish I could help more. I don't have a ton of time right now. I can help you for about 15 minutes, but why don't you ask some other people in the workplace to help you chunk off the other 45 minutes that are there? Delegate out 15 minutes and ask for multiple people to support you. And I can help with 15 minutes in the first part of the piece that you're asking me to do of the project. So we consider ourselves, right? That's the art of boundary setting, is to be able to take a look. And so Helen, hi Helen, how are you? Helen says, how do you interact with these multiple drawbacks within your team? What is the best approach? And I think you're referencing probably burnout as a whole, or maybe you're talking about having a location independent team. I'm not exactly sure what your question is referencing, but let's say it's on the topic of boundary setting, and there's multiple drawbacks of these different types of boundary setters. What we do is we don't go to everybody and say, oh, you're the extreme boundary setter, you're the people pleaser. What we do is we encourage people to learn the art of considering themselves. So something I do on my team is I'll check in with people's boundaries, but I'll remind people, hey, it's important to make healthy compromises, but we also have to get our own work done. So we actually discuss in regular meetings, have you considered what your workload is like before you said yes? Are you willing to make compromises before just saying no? And we keep this communication active in the workplace so people are practicing this art of somebody asked me for help or support. I check in with myself, I consider myself, and then I do what I can, right? What is reasonable. And that prevents employees from just saying yes and then getting it behind on their own projects. But it also promotes employees, if they do have some spare time, to want to make compromises, extend themselves. And then we reward people for this a little bit. So for example, in our sprints, we thank different team members at the end of every sprint. And oftentimes we'll thank people who went out of their way, who showed up. So it's, again, this balance, this harmony we're trying to find of encouraging people to extend, but also encouraging people to check in with themselves, check in with their workload, and take themselves into consideration accordingly. So really, really great question. So research shows that the two types of boundary setters that are actually most likely to leave organizations without communicating are the people pleasers and extreme boundary setters. Oftentimes I would see with clients on a one-to-one basis that clients would say, oh, my boss doesn't respect my boundaries at work. I don't feel comfortable voicing my boundaries. I'm looking for a new job. And I would say hey, I understand that you are trying to enforce your boundaries by looking for a new job, and that's great. But ultimately, we have to set our own boundaries. We have to be the ones who show up, who communicate, who consider ourselves. And if you don't correct that and practice communicating your boundaries at work, you're likely to just find that same pain point in the next place you work at and go through burnout all over again. So we have to get into relationship with our boundaries. We can absolutely encourage this in our employees as well and have these discussions and educational sessions about these things. But there has to be the empowerment of the employee themselves to be able to take this into consideration. Okay. So internal factor number 3, and this is like the big one that we were talking about earlier. This is probably the most important one that has this huge impact. So far, our 2 major internal factors are our unmet needs. Okay, our subconscious mind pulls us in the direction of our unmet needs. Hi, LinkedIn user. And then we've got our boundaries, right? And if we don't have our needs met, we have to intentionally create them. If we don't have good boundaries, we have to learn to take accountability and responsibility for our boundaries and find that balance of considering self and considering others and being able to sort of do both. And then internal factor number 3 is our limiting beliefs. Now, we gain limiting beliefs, and what we want to recognize is, going back to what we talked about earlier, we have a whole bunch of subconscious programs, and our subconscious mind is responsible, remember, for 95 to 97% of our thoughts, feelings, behaviors, actions, and beliefs as a whole. And so we go through life and we don't see the world objectively, right? We don't all see the exact same reality. We interact with reality through the filter of our subconscious belief. So you could take Bob and you could take Tom and you could put them in the same workplace, and they could be doing the exact same job. They could be the same age. They could look similar. They could have the same type of background and education. But if Bob has a belief, to John's point earlier, that says, I will fail, I'm not good enough, and Tom has a belief that says, I am capable of succeeding, you're going to see Tom excel in the workplace more than Bob, right? It's just likely, because here's what happens. I use this acronym called BTEA, and you see it here under point C. And it means beliefs lead to thoughts, thoughts lead to emotions, emotions lead to action. So what this really looks like, if you can take a look here, is this BTEA in motion here. If I have a belief that I'm not good enough, and these are just some examples, this can happen in many different forms, but if I have a belief I'm not good enough, I may start thinking thoughts that are basically the extension of this belief. Thoughts like, well, I'm not clever enough, I'm not capable, I'm not going to be accepted, these sorts of ideas. And how do I feel when I'm thinking these thoughts? Well, my emotion, or my E of BTEA, is I might feel insecure. I might feel anxious. I might feel overwhelmed or afraid. And then neuroscience has proven, and this is very interesting, neuroscience has proven every single decision we make is based on our emotional state. So there's actually a neuroscientist named Antonio Damasio discovered this. And this means that at our tipping point, even those of us who think we're very logical, rational thinkers, at our tipping point, still make emotionally based decisions and then are just quick to rationalize or justify these decisions through logic. So if you're not in charge of your emotional state, you're not in charge of your actions. What impacts your emotional state? Your beliefs and thoughts that are happening on autopilot throughout the course of the day. Now, research shows us, and if you take a look back here, that we think roughly 60 to 70,000 thoughts per day. And so this affects our neurochemical state. This affects the way our nervous system functions. Our emotions are made up of neurochemical reactions, which either put us into sympathetic nervous system mode, fight or flight, or parasympathetic nervous system mode. We have beliefs that we are capable, that we are safe, that we are accepted, and we feel at ease in our workplace. Okay. So I want you to see here, these are some of the common limiting beliefs that we have at work. I am not enough. I am disrespected. Okay, this is a big one. These are the often people who become a little bit more conflict oriented at work. I am unsafe. I am helpless. I am undeserving. These are often the people who won't ask for that raise or promotion. I will fail. I am shameful. I will be rejected. I don't matter. I am disliked. I have no control. I am excluded. I will be abandoned. These are often the people who are afraid of being left from work, like not belonging, kicked out of work, fired from their role, essentially. I am bad. And I want to take a look, when we keep this BTEA component in mind, what this looks like down a chain of events. Okay. So we've got our BTEA in motion. I'm not good enough. If I believe that, I will think thoughts that extend that, right? I'm not clever enough. I'm not capable. How do I feel? I feel insecure. How do I behave? Neuroscience has proven that our decisions are made through emotions. I avoid opportunities. If I have a core belief that I'm unsafe, then I'm maybe the person at work who makes a mistake and panics and thinks I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to be not able to pay my bills. I'm not going to have a place to live. I'm going to be out on the street. What am I going to do? And always is thinking in these worst case scenarios. Well, how do I feel when I'm thinking in these worst case scenarios? These are not conscious thoughts, by the way. These are not thoughts that I'm trying to think. These are subconscious thoughts. These are autopilot thoughts that are taking place with just on autopilot, just throughout the course of your day when you're zoning out. You're not in control of these things. And so, but you can be, by the way. So I'm unsafe. I think I'm going to make a mistake and lose my job. I feel fear. I feel anxiety when I think those thoughts. And then how do I cope? Sometimes I go home and I just numb out. I binge watch television. I eat junk food. I go into a freeze state. We have all these different human behavioral responses to trying to deal with our emotions that we're not even necessarily consciously aware that we're experiencing. Another big one, I am bad, right? A lot of these things, remember, get acquired from childhood. So if I believe I'm bad, I get afraid to say no because I'm afraid that, I'll seem like a bad person. And so then I might feel stressed if I have to say no. And then I may just go, you know what, I'm just going to people please. I'll just say yes, right? And I might be that people pleasing boundary type. So these core beliefs dictate our emotions, our behaviors, our patterns as individuals. And then maybe I'm the person that thinks I'm undeserving. And so maybe I think, I'd love to get a promotion. I've been working here for 3 years and I've been, doing more than anybody else in my role and always showing up. But then I'm like, you know what? I don't know if I deserve, and I might just be carrying this from an imprint from childhood that took place at a subconscious level. But I think, I shouldn't ask for that promotion. And then how do I feel? Maybe I watch everybody else rise in the ranks around me and I feel inadequate. And then maybe I shut down or avoid or stonewall, right? So just notice that. Oh, I love that, Kelly. Is such a good one. Like imposter syndrome, right? Can be a huge dynamic that takes place. And often imposter syndrome comes from things like, I'm not good enough, I will fail, these sorts of limiting beliefs, like John was referencing earlier as well. Over here, I will fail, the top of column 2 there. And then we feel like, I'm an imposter, like I shouldn't be here, right? Those beliefs create that extension of thought. And then how do we feel? We feel insecure. We feel ashamed more easily. And then what do? We hide, we withdraw, we don't volunteer for things or raise our hand. We don't express confidence or take healthy risks at work, calculated risks. So you see this whole chain reaction of events that takes place. And this is why I really like to talk about, like, we have to address root causes. Because if we just try to address the burnout, then we're like, oh, I just need some time off. And it's like, yeah, you can take time off. But then if you go back into your workplace without correcting these root causes, you're going to repeat these same patterns. So how do we actually change beliefs? Well, number one, we have to become aware of these beliefs. Okay, so take a look. What are the major beliefs you have here, right? Is it I have no control and you try to control everything? And fear of being powerless. Are you concerned about being excluded and you're always focusing on your social interactions at work and not focusing on the work itself at times? Do you find that you are afraid of failure? And so you constantly, feel like you're an imposter and withdraw or try to hide or perhaps you are telling the story that I'm a failure, and then you go into work or maybe a job interview and you're so anxious because you believe you're going to fail and that you're not good enough, that you don't perform the way you could if you were just free of these limiting beliefs. You're not yourself. So take a look at these things. And here's what we can know creates change. So there's 3 major steps I'm going to give you on the belief level. Okay. What you need to know first is you're not born with your limiting beliefs. Okay. You don't come into the world with all these beliefs and ideas about yourself. These are acquired. And they're acquired by creating neural pathways. Neural pathways happen through repetition plus emotion. The repetition and emotion fires and wires. So let's say, for example, let's pretend that I have a critical parent, okay? And let's say the parent may be critical because they're trying to prepare me for the world. But if I have somebody who's constantly telling me that I'm not good enough in a variety of different forms, or constantly telling me you didn't do this right, you should have done this better, over time, I'm going to start having this belief that I'm not good enough because I'm getting this idea fired and wired through repetition and emotion. Then this idea imprints my subconscious mind. It becomes a belief I carry about myself. And then at a subconscious level, it's part of my identity. I may take that into my relationships. I may take that into my relationship with money. I may take that into the relationship at work that I have with people, into my idea about my ability to succeed at work in general. This is mine. No matter where I go, this comes with me until I reprogram. And all we do is we want to use the same concepts, the same ideas of repetition plus emotion. Let's fire and wire new ideas. And what happens is old neural pathways, they atrophy over time, just like muscles, right? If you work out one bicep all the time and you leave the other alone, over time, one muscle atrophies, it gets smaller and smaller, and the other one grows and expands. So when we're trying to reprogram and remove limiting beliefs, we first want to question these beliefs. Okay, sure, I have this idea. Let's pretend that I have this belief. I once had this belief. I did some reprogramming, but let's pretend it's still here. And let's say I believe I'm just not good enough. Well, I want to start questioning this, right? Can I really know that? Is this just a concept? I want to start challenging this. And what I'm doing is I'm using my conscious mind to question my subconscious mind, to question those autopilot thoughts. Okay. And then what I want to do is I want to look for opposing evidence. How might I be good enough? And I want to look for examples. And here's why. Your subconscious mind doesn't speak through language. That's why, I really don't believe too much in affirmations. I can sit down and I can say, I'm good enough, I'm good enough. But if I don't feel anything when I say that, it's not reaching my subconscious mind. My subconscious mind is where the problem exists, right? Where the belief has been imprinted or acquired to begin with. So if I'm trying to target the problem at a subconscious level, I can't just think with my conscious mind. So all you have to do are 3 steps. What is my belief? Okay, I'm becoming aware of it. So if I'm working on believing I will fail, I want to question it. Can I 100% know that I'm going to fail? Or is this just an idea that I'm telling myself, right? And why do I want to tell myself that idea? So I want to question it. And then I want to feed my subconscious mind evidence otherwise, okay? How I will succeed. What's the opposite, okay? We call this equilibrating evidence, opposing evidence. Here's why evidence elicits an emotional response, okay? And this is a little in depth here, but it's the last big piece of information. Evidence elicits an emotional response because evidence is a memory. It can be a recent memory, but it's a memory. All memory is the container of emotion. So if I were to tell you right now, close your eyes and think of your favorite childhood memory, what I would see is you would close your eyes and you'd tell the memory, and you'd start off, you'd tell the story, and then you would smile, and your body language would change. And it's because you're actually feeling the stored emotion that's in every single memory. So when you're looking for evidence to oppose this belief that you have, I will succeed. How do I know I will succeed? What's evidence of how I've succeeded in the past? When you tell the story and you remember the memory, it actually elicits an emotional response. And now you've got repetition and emotion that's firing and wiring new programming to replace the old one. So when we're looking at burnout and we're carrying all these beliefs, right, throughout the course of the day, and keep in mind, I mean, this doesn't just benefit, problems with burnout. This benefits like every glass ceiling in our lives. Whenever we're struggling with glass ceilings as a whole, when we can't break through to the next level, it's almost always just a subconscious belief pattern that's holding us back. And when we're like, I'm trying so hard, why can't I break through? It's because there's something internal limiting you that you're not consciously aware of. So when you're looking at this and you are trying to move to the next level, create change, what you want to do is identify. It's 3 steps, very simple. Identify the limiting belief, question it. Okay, can I know for certain I'm going to fail? Why will I succeed? And you're looking for 3 or 4 pieces of evidence every time that the belief comes up, or you can just create a routine around this. And every morning when you start your day, or every evening before you go to bed, you can just repeat some pieces of evidence for why you're going to succeed. And what you're doing is you're firing and wiring new neural pathways, and you're stopping investing in these old stories and ideas. Now, research shows it takes 21 days to create a new habit. What that actually means is it takes roughly 21 days to create a new subconscious program. So if you just repeat this, have a morning routine on your way to work, you drive to work, you're like, why will I succeed today? Why am I capable of succeeding? I have these traits, I have these qualities, I've succeeded in these areas in the past. And you feed this new pathway, you're actually overcoming these limiting beliefs and you're moving the needle. And over time, these fears that you would carry into the workplace that would cause you distress, put you in sympathetic nervous system mode, exhaust you, burn you out, you can literally delete. We weren't born with these programs. We can change them. We can transform them. And I have not only seen this work on myself with many different limiting beliefs that I had to work through, but with so many people, literally tens of thousands at this point, thousands and thousands of students we have in our school. I worked with thousands of clients over the years, one-on-one, in workshops, doing events. And this is all very simple. This is very effective. So these 3 steps can really take you a long way when you want to take a look at a deeper level. So with all of this being said, okay, in summary, if you are somebody who struggles with burnout, what you just want to look at are like, what are some of these key things we discussed today? All of these problems are very easily solvable with just the right tools. So pick 1 or 2 things from today that you can take away. Okay, so the external environment, are there external factors that I have to, address? Maybe talk to a boss or supervisor about in my workplace, or perhaps if you are somebody who owns a company, what can I improve upon? Can I check in with my employees about these external factors and see if there's things I can create change around? If you have unmet needs, okay, or if you think your employee has unmet needs, what are some of your employees' needs who are struggling? Why might they be struggling when you look at those top 10 major needs? And can you create a strategy to help that person get their needs met? Or if this is you personally, can you advocate for those needs? Can you create a strategy to meet those needs outside of work effectively, or ask for those things at work more often so that you're actively initiating instead of just passively reacting? This can really help us fill our buckets and feel replenished and recharged. If you're somebody who struggles with boundaries, or if you're somebody who runs an organization and sees other individuals who struggle with boundaries, can you check in one-to-one? Can you help them communicate their boundaries? If this is you, can you check in one-to-one with a supervisor? Can you communicate your boundaries to a supervisor? And then limiting beliefs, what are the biggest ones for the people you may see struggling in your organization, or if this is you in the relationship to yourself? Pick out that belief, question it, oppose it in a repetitive format for about 21 days, and you will solve for these problems that may have been plaguing you for decades, right? That you can just change in a matter of 21 days through repetition and emotion, or firing and wiring of new neural pathways. And so with all of that being said, If you want to do a deeper dive, you can check out below. I have a free onboarding call that you can check out with one of our team members at the Personal Development School for a free 30-day trial at PDS. And we have over 50 different courses in there that target all root causes of things we're facing. We have a course on burnout with worksheets. We have a program for all of these different things that literally like holds your hand and curates your experience so that you have webinars, social events, an accountability coach inside of PDS for a lot of these things that really helps just move the needle in a community way. Or if you just want to do this on your own, we've got these courses with workbooks, with reprogramming tools. So we have them on burnout, anxiety, depression, workplace relationships, self-esteem, how to resolve conflict effectively, boundaries, social anxiety, of course, just about reprogramming limiting beliefs, of course, all about self-sabotage and procrastination and how to actually stop, and how to set and achieve goals, engaging your subconscious mind. We've got courses on life planning and time management. And in this free 30-day trial at PDS, I do 4 live weekly webinars. So this, but 4 times a week on a whole bunch of different topics. And then we have 2 social events daily with trained facilitators. We've got study groups in there, and then all sorts of different special components, personalized reports for employees if you want to check out with your company for 30 days, and onboarding and check-in calls if you're the individual who wants to get involved. So you can book an onboarding call below if you're interested. And thank you for being here, for asking questions today, for engaging, and for taking the time to really look at things from a different lens today about root causes and how to create change, not by just trying to manage our behaviors or take time off, but actually correct root causes that may be creating burnout as a whole. So that's it for me today. Thank you guys so much. Have a fantastic rest of your day.